This is Heather Kenny, and this is my digital presentation for COM 613, Applying Goffman to Practice.
When you're taking something away from your staff, you better be very careful how you communicate it. In this presentation, I'm going to discuss a communication snafu I experienced while working as an editor at an alternative weekly newspaper in Chicago. In this case, I'm going to show how the messaging regarding a change at the paper could have been handled in a way that was more sensitive to employees' concerns via the application of Goffman's concepts of impression management, framing, footing, and face.
To provide an overview of the environment, at this time the paper was still owned by its founders who had started it in the early 70s. Although it had definitely become a proper workplace, its counterculture roots were still evident, so the office culture was the opposite of corporate. Standards were extremely high. The pace was pretty intense, with lots of hard work and long days and nights, but everyone had pride in their work and believed in the values and the mission of the paper. Editorial jobs at the lower and middle levels paid very little, as is the norm in journalism, but there was a lot of cultural and professional cachet to working there, as well as some generous perks, including a profit-sharing program and a bonus at the winter holidays. Traditionally, the paper also skipped an issue over those holidays, which gave the staff a much-needed break. Thus, while we worked hard, management recognized that we deserved to be treated with respect and rewarded for our dedication and effort. However, a couple of years after I started working there, the publisher suddenly announced at a special meeting that the paper would start publishing an issue over the holidays instead of skipping that week. This caused a lot of anger among the editorial staff, many of whom would not be able to spend the holidays with their families. The staff felt management wanted the income from advertising more than it cared about our well-being and hard work. Following this announcement, the editorial staff was so worked up about the issue that we actually had secret meetings in which we discussed strategies to address our concerns with management, including a possible strike. Analyzing the impression management aspect of this communication using Goffman's dramaturgical metaphor, we find that on the front stage, the publisher intended to communicate a change in policy to editorial employees. Backstage information that the staff was not privy to was that the company either really wanted or needed the extra income that the holiday issue would bring in. However, this front stage communication did not align with the organization's values and mission. For instance, the function of the paper as an alternative form of media implied a distrust of traditional authority and structures and support for ordinary people who were not being served or having their stories told by mainstream media. The company's previous practices also suggested that support for its staff was an important part of its business strategy. The publisher framed the message to the editorial staff as purely a business decision based on advertisers' wishes to have another issue. There was no mention of demand from readers or other factors. The editorial staff, not having much insight into the financial realities or details of the business, and not being given any justification of the change from an editorial point of view, had no choice but to view it from the lens of how this would impact our work experience and personal lives, as well as our previous experience of the paper as a place where workers were respected and not exploited. Consequently, the editorial and business sides of the paper were viewing this message through very different frames. Essentially, the staff felt that something had been taken away from them and that we were powerless to do anything about it. The principal of the message was clearly the executive management team of the paper, presumably with the support of the owners. They were also probably the author of the message, in that it was probably discussed how best to present the information to the staff. The speaker was the publisher, who bore the responsibility of explaining the change and answering questions. The actual meeting took place with the publisher at the front of a room and the editorial staff standing facing her. As the meeting went on, it was clear tension and feelings were running high, and the staff was not happy with the change. The change was clearly meant to benefit the newspaper as a whole, in that it would benefit from increased income as well as the increased visibility of having the paper on the street for an extra week. The publisher attempted to save face for the company by asserting that this move was beneficial for the company as a whole. but it threatened the face of the editorial staff by asserting power in a way that was a departure from previous business decisions and communications, and seemingly from its previous position of valuing the well-being of its employees as much as it had in the past. The threat to the face of the editorial staff was so strong that, as mentioned previously, we discussed a possible strike to assert our power to save face. What strategies might have been better? In terms of impression management, the publisher and other executives might have brought some of the backstage information to the front. For example, they might have been forthcoming about income concerns with details about how rising costs or lowered ad rates were affecting the bottom line, or their concern about the increasing competition from other media outlets. By being forthcoming with such information, they could have framed the situation more effectively and would have presented the staff with a new lens, a business lens, with which to view the situation. With a more comprehensive and detailed outlook about finances and other pressures behind the decision, the staff might have been more understanding about it, especially if it meant that it would ultimately benefit them in the future by ensuring that the paper would continue to thrive. Rather than task the publisher to stand at the front of the room basically by herself, the executive team could have brought in the owners and other executive leaders from other departments who could have answered questions and again helped to draw a bigger picture. The paper's leadership could have been more aware of how the face of the editorial staff would be threatened by this decision. While they were asserting their power, they might have also asserted goodwill by offering a perk to make up for the loss, such as a slight increase to the yearly bonus, or outlining strategies that the way the workload over the holidays could be redistributed or planned for in advance to lighten the load. Even little gestures can go a long way towards soothing employees' dissatisfaction. In fact, after the editorial staff confronted the leadership team with our concerns, they decided to give everyone an extra week of vacation to make up for the lost week.
In conclusion, Goffman's concepts of impression management, framing, footing, and face could provide business communicators at this newspaper with a more comprehensive understanding of the perceptions and perspectives of their editorial staff, helping them to create messaging strategies that prevent negative emotions and promote acceptance of new policies. In this case, the newspaper's executive team should have taken both past practices and organizational values into account when designing their message about the extra issue. Given that part of the reason people liked to work at the newspaper was its uncorporate atmosphere, its dedication to telling the stories of regular people, and its respect for the hard work and sacrifice of the editorial staff, it is best for business communicators from this company to carefully strategize to make sure that they don't contradict those values.
Thank you for watching my presentation.